I stood on the prow of the ship, pulling my long coat tight about me. Overhead, circling seagulls dived and swooped, avoiding the steamer's large funnels, blew acrid black smoke into the cloud-covered sky. The journey from Southampton to Cornwall had been a short one. Only 3 days with a couple of stops along the coastline to pick up passengers and supplies. We were nearing our first destination, Carnow Bay, the very southern tip of Cornwall. There I was to relieve the old lighthouse keeper, take up my new post. Looking across the cold, dark waters, I winced, shifted slightly, favoring my left leg. The war left its mark on me, both mentally and physically. Still, I had wanted to stay and fight. They had medically discharged me while the rest of those poor boys stayed to be slaughtered in the trenches of France. Eventually, they had found a use for me. I'd been drafted into the Lighthouse service. Not as honorable as fighting for one's country, of course, but still an important role, especially in times of war. My new home was on a small island, nothing more than a rock jutting from the sea, with a small, gravelly beach, so I'd been told by the captain of the ship, who didn't seem overly eager to talk about the place, or Carnow Bay at all, for that matter. Apparently the seas around the area were treacherous, mainly because of a large, jagged reef hidden just below the surface of the dark, churning waters. Plus there were small islets dotted in and around the bay that made the waters even more dangerous. Before the King's Bourne Island had been built in 1856, many a sailor had found their doom at the bottom of these unforgiving waters. I could see it then, a blur starting to form on the horizon. Quickly I grabbed a nearby sailor by the arm. "Tell me, friend," I said, "how far away are we from Carnow Bay?" The sailor laughed a silver grin. "We've been sailing through Carnow Bay all morning." "That," he said, pointing to the blur upon the horizon, "is Monkstown, named after the fish." He gave me a throaty chuckle. "You know the area well, then?" I asked eagerly. "Oh, aye," the shabby sailor replied. "Been making this run with the captain for nigh on 6 years now. And Monkstown's where you'll be getting resupplied from once you take over at the Lighthouse. Good place to have a few drinks, lining a lonely fisherman's wife." He winked salaciously. "Pretty much the opposite of Innsmouth." "Innsmouth? The piss hole," he scowled. "Bunch of inbreds. They don't like outsiders. Pretty much keep to themselves. It was once a prosperous little place until the big flood of 1896. After that, the people became closed off. Even been talk of visitors going missing around the area. But stay clear of that place." I nodded, not really understanding. "Anyways," the sailor brightened, "another hour or so, we'll be at Monkstown. You can disembark. Somebody will meet you there, no doubt. Captain has arranged for you to be rowed across the island. Can't say I envy you. It's a lonely life you're choosing. Unless you smuggle a couple of them fishermen's wives across the reach with you." He chuckled before stomping away. Sighing, I went back to my captain and began to pack my trunk. It didn't take long. I didn't have much. Not now. Not after the war. It was around mid-afternoon when we arrived, and I disembarked into a large, gravelly beach. A small trunk that contained all my worldly goods behind me. From what I could see of Monkstown, it was a typical Cornish sea village, not a little on the run-down side. The houses, for the most part, were made of good, honest stone, painted white, slate roofs. Others made from wooden planking, their thatched roofs sagging. Along the seafront, there were rows of nets, strung out to be dried and mended. Scattered about were barnacle-encrusted crab pots, some still baited with the rotten carcasses of fish. The air smelled of brine, tangy smell of the ocean. On the beach lay an assortment of small vessels with various equipment to harvest the bounty of the ocean. "Hello there!" a voice called, almost carried away with the growing wind. "Conroy! James Conroy?" I turned at the sound of my own name. There was a man coming down the slick steps from the quayside that led down to the beachfront. He was tall and slender, with a large mustache, dressed head to toe in a dark blue suit with brass buttons and a small peaked cap. As he drew near, he reached out and I took the offered hand. "Jenkins," he smiled at me. "The name's William Jenkins, postmaster of this particular neck of the woods. I am also head of the parish council and, in this case, the ferryman for the day." He chuckled, nodding out to sea at the looming lighthouse. "Pleasure to meet you," I smiled, retrieving my hand. I was told I'd be met by a Mr. Bob Curry that I'd been coming here to replace. The postman's wide smile faltered somewhat. I'm afraid Mr. Curry's dead 2 days ago. Myself and 2 other concerned members of the parish noticed the lighthouse was not illuminated in particularly foggy weather, nor was the horn sounding. Of course, this was some cause for alarm, with shipbreakers and all." "Shipbreakers?" I questioned. "Ah, yes," he replied, gazing out to sea. "That's what the locals call the reef. Of course, the denizens of Innsmouth have another name for it, but we here at Monkstown give little concern about those rabble." Sorry, what was I again?" "The lighthouse," I reminded him gently. "Ah, yes," he continued. "The fog was terrible, creeping across the water, filling the whole bay, so I myself and a few other bravely launched a rowboat to see what old Rumpot was up to. Forgive me," he said, "for speaking ill of the dead. Bob Curly was, a wastrel, a heavy drinker to boot. He never even attended Mass," he whispered in conspiratory tones. "Anyway, we found the lighthouse wide open and unattended, so we went to investigate the lighthouse keeper's cottage, and, well, that's where we found him, hanging from the rafters. An empty bottle of whiskey beneath his dangling feet." "Oh, never mind," he brightened. "The whole mess has been cleaned up, nothing for you to worry about. Your references from the War Department were impeccable. I've even found you won a few medals overseas." I nodded at this, but said no more. How did I explain to the man that I had tossed those medals into the ocean on my own journey from my old life to this new one? Probably in some vain hope of leaving the old life behind me. Still, it seemed that my dreams were not quite ready to let go of me. "Did you leave a note?" "Sorry?" he said, seemingly confused. "The lighthouse keeper. Did he leave a note?" I got your meaning." He shuffled his feet. "It wasn't so much as a note. Just drunken, mindless scribbling, barely legible. Come along." He took me gently by the shoulder, and I let him lead me a small way down the beach onto a rough wooden dock, where a wooden rowboat lay heavy in the water and laden with supplies. "Hop in," he smiled. "It's only a small ride, but the tide will be turning soon." Following his lead, I sat down, trying hard to keep my balance as he settled in and grabbed up the oars. "There's water in the bottom of the boat," I said, with raised eyebrows. He laughed at that. "There's always some water at the bottom of a boat, Mr. Conroy. One only needs to worry when the water is coming over the top of the boat." Chuckling to himself, he began to row in smooth, practiced strokes towards the waiting lighthouse. The journey took less than 10 minutes, and we landed on a small shingle-covered beach. The lighthouse itself stood atop a rearing cliff that, for where I stood, looked surprisingly flat, as if some dark giant had risen from the sea and lopped off the top of the jagged rock with a sharp axe. Sighing, knowing this would be damn hard work, We loaded ourselves with supplies and headed up the stone stairs that had been carved into the very cliff itself. Blessedly, there was a wooden handrail encrusted with sea salt. Still, I hugged the cliffside, not quite trusting the rotting wood to take my weight until at last, my heart pounding and my legs a little shaky, we finally reached the top. If the exertion bothered my companion at all, he didn't show it. And I had a feeling he may have made this trip many times before, probably to supply the now deceased lighthouse keeper. From what I'd been told of the man, he didn't seem the kind that would frequent town very often. "Well, here we are," the postmaster said, dumping my supplies on the ground before retrieving a large iron key from his pocket. "This is the key to the cottage. Inside, you'll find most of the cupboards already stocked with tinned goods. Also, at the side of the lighthouse is the fuel shed. As you probably know, the lighthouse, while it's old, has recently been fitted with an oil-run generator, and the marvels of modern science. We're truly living in a remarkable age. No doubt you have already been trained, but you will find any instructions you may need to be in the desk drawer of your study, along with the survey maps and maps of the surrounding area on both sea and land. You'll be resupplied once a month. All you need to do is make a list of what you may need and take it down to Grosson's store. He'll give the receipts to me, and I'll claim back any monies from the parish. Now, do you have any questions?" I thought for a moment before shaking my head. Nothing I could think of, not right now. Again, he held out his hand, which I shook, wasting no time. He hurried away without a backwards glance, as if eager to be on his way. Perhaps it was the changing tide. I had a feeling he didn't like this place. I was keen to be back in town, his obligation to me fulfilled. Sighing, I looked up at the cloud-covered sky. It would be dark soon, and I was eager to be settled into my new home. After I'd unpacked my few belongings and restocked my cupboards, I stood outside upon the porch. The cottage was much larger than I expected, with 2 floors and a small back garden with soil that had obviously been transported from the mainlands. A few scant vegetables grew here and there, but mostly it consisted of weeds, a kind of sharp-looking seagrass. As for the house itself, it was a 2-story, 2-bedroom affair. Thankfully, it had indoor plumbing and a study with a good solid desk and multiple bookcases laden with books, survey maps that I had not yet had the time or the inclination to fully explore. The kitchen contained a large wood or coal-burning stove, a few cabinets, and a pantry. There was also a trap door in one dusty corner of this room, with a large iron ring. I pulled it, and it opened easily enough, showing wooden steps that led into darkness. I had assumed this was some kind of cellar, storage area, before slamming the door back in place. I was tired, and not in the mood for any more adventure this day. As I watched the sunset beyond the horizon, buried in the fading shadow of the lighthouse, I lit up my cob pipe and sat on a nearby rock, enjoying the scent of fragrant tobacco, mixed with the salty brine of the good sea air. Could I be happy here? Would the war begin to fade, and my dreams become my own again? It was too early to say. Tapping my pipe clean, I stood and went back inside. I was bone-weary. After a quick meal, I stripped down, washed, climbed into bed. But sleep was a long time coming. It was still dark when I suddenly shut awake. Bolting upright, taking in great gulps of air, as a hot sweat ran down my rigid body. I'd been dreaming, but not about the war. Already it was beginning to fade. Something had been calling to me from the ocean, something in the deep. A malevolent watcher. I fought free of the sheets, threw open the window, letting in a cold wind, trying desperately to remember. Had I been drowning? Pulled into the cold, black abyss? It was no good. It was already gone in the way of dreams. I was about to turn away when a sudden movement caught my eye, something that seemed to slide over the rocks, illuminated by the moon. My first thought was a seal, but how could a seal have traversed the wooden steps that led up to the flattened cliff top? Quickly, I threw on my trousers and boots, not bothering with a shirt, as I hastily ran down the wooden steps, grabbed up my long coat and rifle as I bolted outside. The cold hit me like a fist, and the aroma I had found so pleasant in the sane light of day now smelled somehow stronger, almost overpowering, and I spat into the dirt to clear my parched throat before stepping off the porch. My foot came down on something wet, and I cried out, desperate to maintain my balance. The cloud cleared the moon, and I cried out in horror as I saw the myriad of rotting creatures scattered all about. Dying fish twitched and convulsed amongst the crawling seaweed, where various kinds of octopi slithered and heaved. Mother of God, I whispered, backing up until my knees, unhinged, spilled me backwards onto my own porch. Suddenly there came a gurgling scream that pierced the night, shattering my nerves, and I leapt to my feet and ran back inside before locking the door and slamming various bolts into place. I backed away, rifle shaking, held out before me. Just then there came a loud booming, and the door began to shake and vibrate as brackish water poured and spilled in from under the door. With a cry of terror, I fired off a single shot, missing the door completely. Plaster dust exploded, and the rifle jammed in my hand as I took the stairs 2 at a time before fleeing into my room and barricading the door with a nearby Welsh dresser. I hurried over to the still open window, freeing the jammed round before kneeling and taking up a sniper position, my heart hammering in my chest. Expecting to see a legion of demons parading through the darkness, there was nothing. Only the sullen crash of the ocean, mournful as if it had been cheated of some terrible prize. I don't know how long I had knelt there, but at some point my overstressed mind must have sucked me under, and I awoke with the bright autumn sunshine piercing my eyes. Groaning, I stood, just as there came a vicious knocking from downstairs, and a worried voice drifted up to me. "Conroy! James Conroy, are you up there?" I recognized the voice immediately. It was the voice of William Jenkins, the postmaster. Never in my life had I ever been so happy to hear another human being's voice. Quickly standing, I threw my rifle onto the bed and ran down both steps, then threw open the door. At the sight of my wide-eyed appearance, Jenkins took a step back. Gasping, I roughly pushed past him, not believing what I was actually seeing. The myriad of sea creatures were gone, all of them. Not a single sign remained, except for a few strands of fly-blown seaweed. Ignoring his questions, I turned and inspected the wooden floor, which was still very wet and now stained with whitish deposits of brackish sea salt. Jenkins put a hand on my shoulder, and I jumped, pushing his hand free. "What is it, James?" he said, his face a mask of concern. "What happened? What are you looking for?" Taking a deep breath, I got my racing emotions under control. I grabbed him by the arm. "Something happened last night. I don't know what happened, but something did." "Sure, James, sure. Let's talk," he said, gently pulling free as we stepped inside. Turning, I locked the door and led him into the kitchen. Less than an hour later, I felt like a bloody fool. We both sat at the kitchen table, the good clean light of day seeming to wash away last night's terror. "You see how it is, James," William said, taking a sip of his steaming coffee. "Here's a couple of those rogue waves is all. We get them in the bay this time of year. One washed those fish and crabs and other such things onto your cliffside, and another washed them away and flooded your porch." "But that scream," I shuddered. "That god-awful scream." The postman shrugged. "Seabird, more likely, picking over all those dead fish you mentioned. The islands out in the bay are nesting grounds. They're safe haven for many kinds of seabirds. And the thing I saw, sliding over those rocks?" "James," he sighed, "you yourself said you had awoken from a terrible dream in what is still a strange place. You hadn't been sleeping much beforehand." "So that's it. Do you think it was, what, an attack of nerves?" I huffed. "Oh, you tell me what else it could be." "Mermaids, perhaps," he chuckled. I couldn't help but smile at that one. Perhaps he was right. And it was all an attack of nerves, or a kind of hallucination brought on by a lack of sleep and the last few months of strain that I had suffered abroad. I felt more settled now, and it all seemed so far away in the clean light of day. "Oh, come on now, then," he said, walking me to the steps. Nodding, I rose and fell in beside him as we stepped outside. "Ha!" He turned to me, digging into his jacket pocket. "Mustn't forget this. This is why I came to visit in the first place," he said, handing me a rough brown envelope. "I believe it's from the ministry, confirming your position as the new lighthouse keeper of the Kingsbourne Lighthouse. It should have come yesterday with your arrival, but yeah, you know how these things are, and times of war and all the young men away." I nodded, solemnly, and stuffed the envelope in my pocket, as yet unopened. "Anyway," he brightened, "it must be off." He offered his hand, which I took gladly. "That boat of yours still leaking," I grinned at him, noting the small bobbing vessel tied to the rough wooden dock. He laughed then. "Oh, I'd worry about your own boat, not mine." "I have a boat?" I said, taken by surprise. "Of course," he chuckled. "How do you expect to cross the reach? By swimming? Obviously, you haven't checked the lighthouse inventory I left for you yet." No," I said, embarrassed. "Well, you'll find it there," he said, pointing to the far left side of the beach. "There's a small cave just above the tide line. I believe your predecessor made the place into some kind of workshop. Not that he ever did much work. Couldn't say what kind of state you'll find the place in. Anyway, I must be off. Still plenty to do. Bye, James." We shook hands once again, and he descended the rickety stairs with the same sure-footedness that I had noted before. I didn't stay to watch him leave, but returned to my new home and cooked myself some breakfast before checking over the lighthouse and making sure the generator was full and the lamps and windows were thoroughly cleaned. All this took me to around midday. I only stopped for a brief bite to eat before descending the stairs down to the beach. The day was a clear one, and I could quite easily make out the roofs and spires of Monkstown. Turning, I headed down the beach, my boots gritting on the rough sand, the sea spray dampening my hair and rough woolen long coat. After only a couple of minutes, I reached the mouth of the cave, which was wide and high-ceilinged, but not very deep, only going 8 or maybe 10 feet into the rock face. There, I found my boat, wrapped in canvas and secured by a rough hemp rope. Nailed to the walls with the rusting spikes were an assortment of tools. As I ventured further in, I found an old pitted sea chest with a rusting padlock. I ignored this and quickly untied the boat, struggling somewhat with the sailor's knot that had been tied in place. At last I freed the knot and threw back the canvas. The boat beneath was actually in good condition, showing signs of recent repairs. 2 oars inside were firm and sturdy, showing no signs of wear or splintering. Satisfied for now, I covered the whole thing back in place, tying it down with much simpler knots I had learned in the army and back home on the farm, before taking my attention back to the sea chest. Kneeling down, I gave it an experimental shove, expecting it to be heavy, perhaps filled with more tools, maybe some nails and strong hemp rope, but it shifted easily. Still, I heard something slide inside. Curious now, I tugged on the lock, but rusted as it was, it stubbornly would not budge. Standing, I grabbed an old craftsman hammer from a peg and gave it an experimental swing before turning it on the lock. It took 3 blows before the lock gave way in a shower of rust-filled sparks, and I put the hammer back in place before opening the creaking lid. There was a package at the bottom. Something wrapped in more canvas and the same hemp rope. Reaching down, I picked it up and realized almost immediately by its weight and size, it was a slender book of some kind. Stuffing it in my coat, weary of the growing wind, I double-checked my boat was secure. I headed back up the steps and went back inside. Quickly, I took off my sodden coat and boots and lit a large fire in the study. Once the fire was burning to my satisfaction, I sat at my desk with a glass of sipping whiskey to help fight off the cold and began to unwrap the book. Cursing, I picked at the small knot until at last it popped free, revealing a leather-bound book within. The leather was faded and ancient-looking, and the binding was still intact. I turned the book over, looking for some kind of name or title, but there was nothing. Taking another drink, I opened the book. The first page was blank. The second read the diary of Lucas Van Draven, 1836. Outside, the wind howled, and the seas crashed like a harbinger of doom. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer 420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel 66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna LaQueda, Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, Jenna's Pet, Clonable, Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Thicomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kinchin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.